Welcome to this lightboard session, everyone, where we're going to talk about vSAN. And in this session, we're going to look at what a disk group is in vSAN. So, John, I'm going to ask you the question, what is a disk group?
So a disk group is a unit of resources within the VMware vSAN data store. And this can consist of, at a basis, at a bare minimum, 2 devices, although we tend to recommend more. It's going to have at least 1 caching device that you see here on the top, and then 1 to 7 capacity devices. These capacity devices, the sum of them is our raw capacity of our data store. That cache tier, that's a performance tier. It's going to be a higher class of SSD. You're going to see it handle the write acknowledgement. So from our virtual machine perspective, where the VM is acknowledging that I/O, it gets it once it's been mirrored or RAID 5'd across multiple of these SSDs. Now the capacity, that data is slowly going to bleed out. If it's older data, it's not overrun quickly. It's going to move from the cache down to the capacity tier. And that capacity tier, these drives, they could be the same class, that same higher performance, or they could be, let's say, nicely cost optimized. They're a bit slower, but it doesn't really matter because they're still going to be fast enough from the read path, which is what's going to happen there. You start with at least 1 disk group and a host, and you can add up to 5. Now, this is going to depend, obviously, on how many drive bays you have. But if you think about it, if I've got a 1U server that's got 8 drive bays, I might have 2 disk groups. If I've got 24, since there's a total of 8 devices per disk group, I might have, say, 3 disk groups in that host or more, depending on the amount of performance that I'm trying to add. As you add more of these, you will scale additional performance. In regards to that, you can also add capacity devices after the fact. So just because you only had 2 capacity devices to start with, you could slam another 5 into there. We do ask that you do that evenly across the disk groups within a host where possible.
Yeah, one of the things I think sometimes we get the question of when somebody adds another disk group, how is that presented in vSAN? And the nice part about vSAN, again, per cluster, it's a single data store. So in that case, you add another disk group or you add more devices to an existing disk group, it's simply going to increase the capacity and the capabilities of that single data store. Now, in this case, oftentimes then we get that follow-up question of how many disk groups should we have? And just as John pointed out, we can have a single disk group of a single caching device and a single capacity device, but that's not necessarily what we recommend because we were really focused on this idea about we want to provide a mechanism that allows you to have a lot of or a relative amount of performance, but getting the value in capacity from these capacity tier devices that are really value-based and focused on high density and storage performance wasn't necessarily their first objective.
Well, the thing I like to think about from a scaling is you can scale out by adding hosts and then add appropriate disk groups with that, or you can scale deep and add more capacity and more disk groups, more cache within a host. And one thing you might think about from a design basis is maybe, if you're worried about your storage growth growing a little bit faster than your compute growth, one thing you can do to help address that is leave some room for more disk groups within your host. Maybe you get some 2 RU boxes that have 24 drive bays, but you only purchase 12 up front, enough to deal with today's capacity growth. But that way you don't necessarily have to go add hosts and the appropriate, overhead that's tied to that and networking ports and things like that. That said, though, if you do need to scale out a lot of throughput, you need to scale out a lot of performance, more hosts are eventually going to be in your future at some point.
Yeah, no, both of those scaling options are a fantastic option for our vSAN customers, and it's really representative of the flexibility of the architecture. If you would like to learn more about the disk groups and what the capabilities are, what the recommendations are, feel free to go out to core.vmware.com where you will find all things related to vSAN as well as VMware related storage. So with that, thank you very much.